As dawn broke on September 1st, 1939, the world was unprepared for the cataclysm that was about to unfold. Germany's invasion of Poland was not merely a military offensive, but the beginning of a global conflict that would redefine the contours of power and human endurance. World War II was vast in its reach, involving nations from the frosty plains of Russia to the tropical islands of the Pacific. And its impact was both horrifying and transformative. This essay seeks to explore the multidimensional tapestry of World War II, combining strategic military maneuvers with poignant human stories to offer a comprehensive narrative of one of history's most devastating conflicts. This exploration will not only delve into the grand strategies and pivotal battles, but also give voice to the individual experiences that encapsulate the broad spectrum of human emotion and resilience. From the desolate streets of besieged Leningrad to the urgent strategy rooms of the Allied forces, we will trace the indelible changes wrought upon the globe over those 6 years of relentless warfare. The road to World War II was paved with economic despair, political instability, and ideological extremism. Following the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, Europe was a continent of simmering resentments and economic hardship. In Germany, rampant inflation and the humiliation of defeat created fertile ground for radical ideologies. The ascension of Adolf Hitler and his doctrine of Aryan supremacy and Lebensraum, or living space, promised a disillusioned populace both scapegoats and salvation. Meanwhile, Japan sought expansion in Asia, driven by its own imperial ambitions and the perceived weakness of Western powers in the Pacific. This cocktail of ambitions set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the world. This geopolitical chessboard was marked by alliances and treaties that would soon be tested under the strain of war. The aggression of Axis powers would ultimately lead to the unraveling of peace. The term Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, aptly captures the essence of Germany's military strategy in the early years of World War II. Characterized by rapid movements and assaults using tanks and air power, Blitzkrieg aimed to break through enemy defenses with speed and ferocity, thereby avoiding prolonged combat and minimizing German casualties. This was first demonstrated in Poland in September 1939, where German forces overwhelmed the Polish army before it could fully mobilize. The success of Blitzkrieg was not merely due to technological superiority, but also to the element of surprise and the psychological shock inflicted on the enemy. Following Poland, this strategy was replicated with terrifying efficiency in the invasions of Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands and France in 1940. The fall of France, in particular, was a devastating blow to Allied morale. It was a nation considered to have one of the strongest armies in Europe. The speed of the German advance, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line by moving through the Ardennes, a route considered impassable for tanks, left the Allies reeling. The effectiveness of Blitzkrieg lay in its ability to disorganize and disrupt enemy forces and command structures, creating situations where the enemy was forced to surrender or be encircled and annihilated. This initial phase of the war demonstrated the lethal efficiency of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, setting a daunting precedent for the battles to come. By the summer of 1940, Britain stood alone against the might of Nazi Germany. The fall of France left Britain vulnerable to invasion, but the English Channel provided a natural defence. The German strategy shifted towards achieving air superiority as a precursor to invasion. This led to the Battle of Britain, a series of conflicts fought entirely in the air between August and October 1940. The Royal Air Force, although outnumbered, used radar technology and the fighting spirit of its pilots to repel the Luftwaffe's assaults. The resilience of the British under the leadership of Winston Churchill was put to the test during the subsequent Blitz, Germany's relentless bombing campaign against British cities. London was bombed for 57 consecutive nights, causing immense destruction and loss of life. However, the Blitz failed to break the British spirit. Instead, it galvanized public support against Germany. The Battle of Britain marked the first major defeat of Hitler's military forces, with the Luftwaffe suffering substantial losses. It was a turning point that showed Hitler's forces were not invincible and provided a crucial morale boost to the Allies. It also marked a significant shift in the war's dynamic, proving that air power could play a pivotal role in determining the outcome of the war. Initiated on June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa was Adolf Hitler's ambitious invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest military operation in human history, involving over 3 million Axis troops along a front that stretched from the Arctic Sea to the Black Sea. Hitler's objective was clear: to crush the Soviet forces swiftly, gain control of its vast natural resources, and enforce the ideological goal of eradicating Bolshevism. Contrary to expectations, the Soviet resistance was tenacious, and the harsh Russian winter impeded the German advance. As German forces initially made significant inroads, capturing millions of Soviet soldiers and considerable territories, the tide began to turn with the onset of winter. The ill-prepared German troops faced brutal conditions, and the supply lines were overstretched. The inability to capture key cities like Moscow and Leningrad during the first winter of the campaign marked the beginning of a prolonged conflict that Hitler had desperately hoped to avoid. The failure of Operation Barbarossa opened the Eastern Front, which would become the deadliest theatre of war in World War II. It not only depleted German resources and morale, but also galvanized the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin's ruthless leadership, setting the stage for major Soviet offensives that would eventually push back the Nazis all the way to Berlin. The Siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Stalingrad represent two of the most horrific chapters of the Eastern Front. The Siege of Leningrad, lasting from September 1941 to January 1944, was a deliberate campaign by the German army to starve the city into submission. The residents of Leningrad faced extreme deprivation, with hundreds of thousands dying from starvation, cold, and bombardment. During this siege, the resilience of the Leningrad citizens was put to a grueling test as they struggled for survival amidst constant shelling and dwindling food supplies. The city's defenders created a lifeline across the frozen Lake Ladoga, known as the Road of Life, which became essential for survival, providing some relief in the form of food and fuel supplies. The Battle of Stalingrad, from August 1942 to February 1943, was marked by its brutal close-quarters combat and complete disregard for civilian casualties. It became a turning point in the war as the encircled German Sixth Army was forced to surrender after months of fierce fighting. This battle was not only a military defeat for Germany, but also a devastating blow to German morale, proving that the seemingly invincible German army could be defeated. Both of these battles exemplify the extreme human suffering and the brutal nature of warfare on the Eastern Front. They also highlight the Soviet Union's capacity for endurance and eventual retaliation, which played a pivotal role in the downfall of Nazi Germany. The North African campaign was a crucial battleground in World War II, serving as a critical theatre of war from 1940 to 1943. It was here that the Allies and Axis powers vied for control of the Mediterranean, essential for maintaining supply lines and strategic dominance. The campaign was characterized by its sweeping tank battles across the desert, involving some of the most famous military figures of the war, including General Erwin Rommel of Germany and General Bernard Montgomery of Britain. Initially, the Axis powers had significant successes, with Rommel's Afrika Korps pushing the British forces back through Libya and into Egypt. However, the tide of the campaign turned with the Battle of El Alamein in October 1942, where Montgomery's 8th Army delivered a decisive defeat to Rommel's forces. This victory halted the Axis advance towards the Suez Canal, a vital link to British colonial interests and oil supplies in the Middle East. The campaign in North Africa is notable not only for its strategic military outcomes, but also for the harsh conditions faced by soldiers in the desert environment. Extreme temperatures, sandstorms, and the vast open spaces posed unique challenges to both sides, influencing the forms of warfare employed. The eventual Allied victory in North Africa set the stage for the Italian campaign and opened a new front in southern Europe, which further drained Axis resources and contributed to the overall Allied success in the war. The Pacific Theatre Pearl Harbor to Midway. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, marked the explosive entry of the United States into World War II and the beginning of the Pacific Theatre. This surprise military strike by the Japanese Navy against the United States led to the near annihilation of the American Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor, thrusting the United States into a war across two oceans. Following Pearl Harbor, the Japanese forces rapidly expanded their reach across the Pacific, capturing territories including the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. This phase of swift victories highlighted the initial dominance of the Japanese in the Pacific. However, the tide began to turn with the Battle of Midway in June 1942. This pivotal naval battle, fought entirely by aircraft from aircraft carriers, resulted in a devastating blow to the Japanese fleet, which lost 4 of its aircraft carriers. The Battle of Midway is often considered a turning point in the Pacific War, as it significantly weakened the Japanese Navy's capability to project air power and shifted the strategic initiative to the Allies. From this point onward, the United States and its allies began a long, island-hopping campaign towards Japan, gradually diminishing the Japanese hold on the Pacific Islands. The Pacific Theatre was marked by intense naval engagements, amphibious landings, and brutal jungle warfare. It was distinguished by the vast distances over which battles were fought, the reliance on naval and air power, and the fierce resistance of Japanese forces, all of which posed significant logistical challenges for both sides. The Code War, intelligence in World War II. The secret war of codes and ciphers in World War II played a pivotal role in the Allied victory. Intelligence operations such as Britain's Ultra and America's Magic involved the decryption of Axis communications and turned the tide in several critical battles. The work at Bletchley Park, where British cryptanalysts broke the German Enigma machine, stands as one of the most celebrated intelligence victories of the war. The intelligence gleaned from these operations provided crucial insights into Axis strategies and troop movements, allowing the Allies to anticipate and counter enemy operations effectively. The Battle of the Atlantic, where decrypted messages helped the Allies reduce losses from German U-boats, and the Battle of Midway, where advanced knowledge of Japanese plans allowed the US Navy to prepare adequately, are key examples of intelligence dramatically altering the course of the war. Beyond technological and strategic aspects, the intelligence war also had a profound human component. Code breakers, often civilians and mathematicians, worked under intense pressure and secrecy, knowing that their success or failure could change the war's outcome. Their contributions remained unsung for decades due to the classified nature of their work. The turning tide, Midway and Guadalcanal. The battles of Midway and Guadalcanal marked significant turning points in the Pacific theatre, shifting the balance of power from the Axis to the Allies. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a stunning naval victory for the United States, which had been on the defensive following Pearl Harbor. It inflicted irreparable damage on the Japanese fleet, which lost 4 aircraft carriers. Following Midway, the Allies took the initiative to the Solomon Islands with the Guadalcanal campaign, which began in August 1942. This was the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific and involved intense, grueling combat over air, land and sea. The struggle for Guadalcanal highlighted the horrific conditions of jungle warfare, where aside from battling an entrenched enemy, soldiers also fought against disease and malnutrition. Guadalcanal eventually ended in February 1943 with an Allied victory, marking Japan's first major land defeat. These battles not only halted Japanese expansion, but also provided a morale boost to the Allies, demonstrating that victory in the Pacific was achievable. Following the victory in North Africa, the Allies initiated the Italian campaign in July 1943 with the invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky. The campaign aimed to knock Italy out of the war, secure the Mediterranean sea lanes, and divert German divisions from the Eastern Front and the anticipated invasion of northern France. The capture of Sicily was followed by the mainland invasion at Salerno and the surrender of Italy in September 1943. However, the subsequent push northward became a slog against a determined German defense. The Italian terrain, characterized by mountains and rivers, proved ideal for defense, and the Germans exploited this fully. Battles at places like Anzio and Monte Cassino were characterized by high casualties and slow progress. The Gothic Line, a formidable series of German defensive positions in northern Italy, represented the last major line of defense. It was not breached until 1945, showing the persistent nature of German resistance and the difficulties of mountain warfare. The Italian campaign drew significant German forces away from other fronts and contributed to the weakening of Nazi Germany. However, it also proved to be a costly and prolonged engagement for the Allies, highlighting the complexities of coalition warfare and the brutal reality of fighting along the so-called soft underbelly of Europe. Operation Overlord, commonly known as D-Day, commenced on June 6, 1944, and remains one of the largest amphibious military assaults in history. The invasion of Normandy was the culmination of meticulous planning and the accumulation of resources necessary to establish a Western front against Germany. The landings involved over 156,000 American, British and Canadian forces landing on 5 beachheads named Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword. The initial landings, while successful, were met with fierce resistance, particularly at Omaha Beach, where American forces suffered significant casualties. Following the beachhead's establishment, the Allies faced a grueling battle through the Normandy countryside, characterized by hedgerow warfare that slowed the advance and inflicted heavy losses. The breakout from Normandy and the subsequent liberation of Paris in August 1944 marked a significant turning point in the liberation of Western Europe. The success of Operation Overlord was due not only to the bravery of the soldiers, but also to the overwhelming superiority in Allied air power and the effective use of armoured divisions. This operation laid the groundwork for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. The liberation of Paris in late August 1944 was a highly symbolic moment in Ubuntu, representing the beginning of the end for Nazi occupation in Western Europe. As Allied forces pushed through France following their successful breakout from Normandy, the French resistance played a critical role in the city's liberation ahead of the arriving Allied military units. Following the joyous liberation of Paris, Allied forces continued their advance into Germany. This final phase of the war in Europe involved crossing the Rhine River, a significant natural obstacle and a defensive line for the German military. The crossing, achieved through a combination of airborne assaults and ground operations, allowed the Allies to penetrate deep into the heart of Germany. The push into Germany was characterized by a combination of rapid advances and fierce German resistance, as Nazi forces were now fighting in defense of their homeland. The capture of key cities and industrial areas in Germany was crucial for hastening the end of the war in Europe, as it crippled the Nazi war machine. These final months of the war also exposed the Allied forces to the full horror of the Nazi regime as they liberated numerous concentration camps, revealing the extent of the Holocaust. This discovery added a new urgency to the Allied efforts to end the war swiftly and bring those responsible to justice. War in the shadows, resistance movements, and partisan fighters. Throughout World War II, resistance movements across occupied Europe played a crucial, often unsung role in the Allied war effort. These groups, comprised of civilians and remnants of defeated armies, conducted sabotage, gathered intelligence, and maintained guerrilla warfare, significantly disrupting Axis operations. In countries like France, Yugoslavia, and Poland, resistance fighters took significant risks to undermine Axis control, from derailing trains to assassinating collaborators and officials. In Eastern Europe particularly, partisan activities were so disruptive that significant German military resources were diverted to counteract them, which indirectly aided the major Allied military operations on the eastern and western fronts. The support for these resistance groups was a key element of Allied strategy. Supplies, weapons, and agents were often parachuted into occupied territories to aid these groups. The bravery and sacrifices of resistance fighters not only contributed to the military defeat of the Axis powers, but also helped restore national pride and paved the way for post-war recovery in their countries. The Holocaust, the depths of human cruelty. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest chapters of human history, an orchestrated campaign by Nazi Germany aimed at the systematic extermination of Jews, along with other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. This genocide was carried out across occupied Europe, with 6 million Jews murdered, along with Romani people, disabled individuals, Polish and Soviet civilians, communists, socialists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. The industrial scale of the Holocaust was unprecedented, with extensive use of concentration camps designed for mass murder, such as those at Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. The discovery of these camps by the Allied forces in the final days of the war revealed the extent of Nazi brutality and left an indelible mark on global consciousness. The Holocaust not only highlighted the extreme ideology and cruelty of the Nazi regime, but also prompted significant post-war reflections on human rights and the need for international protections against genocide. The trials at Nuremberg, which brought many of those responsible for the Holocaust to justice, set precedents in international law and human rights that continue to influence the global justice system today. The final solution: concentration camps and extermination. The final solution was the Nazi plan for the complete extermination of the Jewish people, a policy that evolved from persecution to systematic murder. Throughout occupied Europe, Jews were rounded up and sent to concentration camps where they were subjected to forced labor, medical experiments, and mass execution. The operations of these camps were marked by a chilling efficiency. They included gas chambers designed specifically for mass killing, such as those at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The network of camps also included transit camps and labor camps, contributing to a vast system of exploitation and murder. The liberation of these camps by Allied forces exposed the full horror of the Nazi atrocities to the world. The images and testimonies from survivors played a crucial role in documenting the scope of Nazi crimes and served as key evidence in post-war trials. The legacy of the final solution is a stark reminder of the depths of cruelty possible under totalitarian regimes and has driven international efforts to prevent future genocides. The impact of World War II was not confined to the battlefields. It permeated every aspect of life for those living in the warring nations. On the home front, civilians were mobilized to support the war effort in unprecedented ways. Rationing, blackouts, and air raid precautions became part of daily life, as did the constant threat of bombing raids, particularly in cities like London, Berlin, and Tokyo. In nations like Britain and the United States, the war effort led to significant changes in social norms, particularly regarding gender roles. Women entered the workforce in large numbers, taking on roles traditionally held by men in factories, offices, and even military bases. These changes were crucial for the war effort, but also had lasting effects on gender equality movements in the post-war years. The war also spurred significant technological and industrial advances as nations sought new weapons and strategies to gain an advantage. From radar to jet engines and nuclear power, the innovations driven by the war had profound implications for both military and civilian applications in the post-war world. The resilience and sacrifice of those on the home front were critical to sustaining national morale and directly contributed to the Allied victory. The collective effort also set the stage for post-war recovery and the significant economic changes that would transform the participating nations in the decades to follow. The Allied strategic bombing campaign against Axis powers was one of the most contentious strategies of World War II. It involved large-scale bombing raids aimed at destroying the enemy's capability to wage war, targeting industrial sites, transportation networks, and cities. The philosophy behind strategic bombing was to cripple the enemy's infrastructure and demoralize the civilian population, thereby reducing the enemy's ability to sustain military operations. The effectiveness of strategic bombing is still debated by historians. Cities like Dresden, Hamburg, and Tokyo were subjected to extensive firebombing, which caused massive civilian casualties and widespread destruction. While these raids did impact Axis war production and logistics, they also raised ethical questions about the cost in terms of civilian lives and the destruction of cultural heritage. The development of air power technology during the war, including the introduction of long-range bombers like the B-17 and B-29, significantly enhanced the Allies' capacity to carry out these bombings. The culmination of the strategic bombing campaign was the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, which remains one of the most controversial acts of warfare in history. The Yalta Conference in February 1945 was a pivotal moment in World War II and the shaping of the post-war world, involving leaders Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. The decisions made at Yalta addressed the reorganization of war-torn Europe and the strategy for the final defeat of Germany. One of the key agreements was the division of Germany into occupation zones, which set the stage for what would eventually become East and West Germany during the Cold War. The conference also addressed the issue of Poland's sovereignty and the establishment of the United Nations, aiming to ensure future global stability and peace. While Yalta was intended to promote cooperation between the major Allied powers, it also sowed seeds of future conflicts. Disagreements over the interpretation and implementation of the agreements would contribute to the onset of the Cold War, as tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies escalated in the aftermath of the war. In December 1944, in a desperate attempt to split the Allied forces and capture the crucial Belgian port of Antwerp, Hitler launched the Arden Offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge. This surprise attack caught the Allied forces off guard, leading to a significant, albeit temporary, pushback against American and British divisions. The battle was characterized by harsh winter conditions which posed severe hardships for both sides. American forces, particularly at key locations like Bastogne, held out heroically against the German advance until reinforcements could arrive. The failure of the Ardennes offensive marked the last major offensive operation by the Nazis, as their resources and manpower were substantially depleted. This battle was not only a testament to the resilience and strategic capability of the Allied forces, but also marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Within months, Allied forces crossed the Rhine into Germany, and the war in Europe moved towards its inevitable conclusion. The crossing of the Rhine River by Allied forces in March 1945 was one of the final hurdles in the push into the heartland of Nazi Germany. The Rhine was a significant geographical barrier and a symbol of German defensive strength. Operation Plunder, the codename for the crossing, involved a massive coordinated effort of ground, air and naval forces. The successful breach of the Rhine facilitated a rapid advance into Germany, allowing Allied forces to encircle the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, and expedite the collapse of Nazi military resistance. Cities fell in quick succession, and German forces were either captured or retreated in disarray. The crossing of the Rhine was not just a strategic military victory, but also a psychological blow to the Nazis, signaling the inevitable defeat of Hitler's regime. The final weeks of the war saw a race between Allied forces to capture key sites and cities before the official surrender of Germany in May 1945. The fall of Berlin in April 1945 marked the culminating point of World War II in Europe. After years of brutal conflict and millions of lives lost, the Allied forces finally breached the capital of Nazi Germany. The battle for Berlin was intense and destructive, with Soviet and Allied forces converging on the city from multiple directions. The capture of Berlin was fiercely contested, as German forces, composed largely of remnants of military units and Volkssturm militia, fought desperately in a final stand. The city itself was a scene of chaos and destruction, with civilians caught in the crossfire and suffering immense hardships. The official surrender of German forces in Berlin on May 8, 1945, known as Victory in Europe or VE Day, marked the end of Nazi aggression and a moment of profound relief and joy across the continent. However, the aftermath of the battle left Berlin in ruins, and the division of the city among the Allies laid the groundwork for the Cold War tensions that would soon emerge. The conclusion of World War II in the Pacific was marked by the United States' use of atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. These bombings were the first, and to date only, uses of nuclear weapons in war. The devastating power of the bombs brought about the immediate surrender of Japan and the end of World War II. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed tens of thousands of people instantly, and many more would succumb to injuries and radiation sickness in the following years. The decision to use atomic weapons was driven by the desire to end the war swiftly and avoid the massive casualties expected from an invasion of Japan. However, the ethical and humanitarian implications of this decision have been the subject of intense debate ever since. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is profound, influencing global nuclear policy and the course of international relations in the subsequent Cold War era. The threat of nuclear warfare became a defining element of global security considerations, leading to treaties and international efforts aimed at preventing nuclear proliferation. The unconditional surrender of Axis powers in 1945 marked the end of World War II, a conflict that had engulfed the globe and resulted in unprecedented devastation and loss of life. The aftermath of the war was a complex period of rebuilding, retribution and reorganization of international systems. Post-war Europe faced enormous challenges, including the displacement of millions of people, extensive urban destruction, and the task of denazification. The Nuremberg trials were pivotal in bringing Nazi war criminals to justice and set precedents in international law regarding war crimes and crimes against humanity. In Asia, the end of the war led to significant political changes, including the rise of communist movements and the onset of decolonization in Southeast Asia. The reconstruction of Japan, under the guidance of the Allied occupation led by General Douglas MacArthur, transformed Japanese society and laid the foundation for its post-war economic success. The creation of the United Nations was a direct outcome of the war's end, representing a global attempt to prevent future conflicts of such devastating scale. The geopolitical landscape of the world had been irrevocably changed, setting the stage for the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies, which would dominate global affairs for decades to come. Throughout World War II, countless individuals contributed to the war effort in roles that were often overlooked but absolutely vital. Medics, engineers and logistics personnel played crucial roles in supporting combat operations and sustaining the lives of soldiers. Medics provided critical medical care under harrowing conditions, often risking their own lives to save others. Engineers were responsible for building and maintaining the infrastructure necessary for military movements, from bridges and roads to temporary bases. The logistics teams ensured that troops were well supplied with food, ammunition, and essential equipment, facing immense challenges in often hostile environments. These unsung heroes of the war demonstrated extraordinary dedication and resourcefulness, contributing immeasurably to the Allied victory.